Confronted my husband about why his coworkers think I'm his sister, not his wife, and his shocking confession is unfolding now. My husband, I'll call him Josh, and I have been together for 6 years, married for 4, and we don't have kids. We have a really healthy and communicative relationship. We're both pretty easygoing and I really love him. He started working at a large accounting firm about 3 years ago, and from what he tells me he loves it there. He's made a lot of friends through his job and he goes out with them for drinks and social events quite often, and I've been totally okay with that. I'm quite introverted, so I've never been interested in meeting his colleagues or work friends, nor have I asked to. I've got my own circle of friends and I'm fine with us having separate friend groups. After what happened yesterday, it only just occurred to me that he has never actually asked me if I'd like to meet any of them, or go to one of his work events. I guess that's important context. Anyway, I'll start with what happened a few months ago, that I had brushed off until now. I was at a bar with some friends for a couple of Friday after work drinks, and a guy approached me. He was there with some friends, too. He looked slightly familiar, but I hadn't met him before. He seemed friendly enough, and he asked me, my name / right? I think I must have just given him a confused look, because he followed up with, I'm Jake, I work with Josh. I realized that I recognized him from some photos on my husband's phone. I don't use social media except for a private Instagram, so I'm not sure if he posted the photos anywhere, but we've got a very trusting relationship, so I look in his photos sometimes. Don't hate me. This is where it gets a bit embarrassing. I'm a bit socially awkward and so I struggled to end the conversation, but he just kept talking at me. I guess he was already a couple of beers deep. But while he was talking, he said something like, it's great that you guys are still so close. I haven't talked to my brother in ages. At the time I was like, huh? But I just assumed he was drunk and not making sense, so I ignored it. He started to get a little flirty, so I turned to my friends and we left shortly after that. I didn't say anything to them about it and it didn't seem like a big deal to me. I also decided not to tell my husband that I had met his coworker Jake. Not to hide it, but because I figured the guy wouldn't even remember talking to me, and I didn't want to make it awkward for Josh at work by telling him his colleague tried to hit on me. I just thought no harm no foul. But, yesterday morning, I was out walking our dog, Monty. He's a cross between a few breeds and has very unique markings. This matters, I promise, and was on my way to my regular cafe, which is in town. I was waiting in line to order, and the guy in front was an older man. He got his coffee and turned around, but stopped and looked at my dog and goes, hello Monty. Monty was super excited to see him, apparently, and so I guessed that the guy was another colleague of Josh's, because Josh brings the dog to the office a couple of times a week. I thought it was sweet, to be honest, so I smiled at him and said hi. He introduced himself. I guessed correctly that he was a colleague, but then he said something like, aren't you a good sister, walking his dog for him? I was so confused that I didn't even know how to react at first, so I stumbled on my words and just said it's my dog. I regret it, but I genuinely couldn't bring myself to correct him and say that I'm Josh's wife and not his sister. It was just too awkward, and I just wanted to leave because I think was suddenly dawning on me what might have been going on. He asked me something about sharing a dog, but I was able to escape the conversation by being next in line to order my coffee, and he left. I seriously don't know what to do, because what the fuck? Do I even ask my husband about this? Part of me is just assuming or hoping that it's a mistake, that he doesn't talk about me much at work and they assume we are related because we both have brown hair. But the thought that he has been telling his coworkers that I'm his sister, and evidently they have seen what I look like, so they must have seen photos, makes my stomach churn. I don't even know how I would broach the subject with him. I need some help. What would you guys do in this situation? I have only told one friend what happened because it's so weird and embarrassing, and she has jumped straight to time to plot his downfall, because she's my ride or die. Love her, but I don't want to immediately assume the worst or ruin my marriage over something that could be nothing. I'm sorry for the long and rambly post, but I would really appreciate any and all advice. First thing I just want to clear up, I've seen a lot of people suggesting I have crippling social anxiety, or am severely introverted, which I suppose you could glean from the way I explained what happened, but I'm not. I meant that I'm slightly introverted in that I'm not the most eager to meet lots of new people at once, especially a bunch of finance brothers whose weekends consist of unending sports bar beers, where I assume I would be mansplained everything until my ears bleed. Prob a negative assumption, but I'm sure some of you know what I mean. I suppose you could say that I'm confrontation averse in that I'm quite laid back and prefer to keep a conversation easy and positive. I don't like it when things are awkward and correcting when people misrecognize me as one of those things, but I'm not terrified of confrontation. Also, my husband and I do share some mutual friends. I didn't explain that well, but our lives are not entirely separate. The way he acts towards me around our mutual friends is extremely affectionate and normal. It is only his work friends that I have never interacted with. I've also seen, and some people suggest that what is going on is equivalent to my husband beating me and me hopelessly wondering whether I should break up with him. Or that I'm stupid for thinking my relationship was healthy when it clearly isn't. Like, damn, cut me some slack. I'm a real person and this is an entirely alien and bizarre situation for me. My first reaction wasn't to assume the worst, but I do appreciate that you all have made me certain that it is a big deal. I guess I needed confirmation that the things that happened are enough proof that Josh has been purposefully lying, and they weren't just mix-ups. I'm going to talk to him today, and ask him directly why he's telling his coworkers that I'm his sister. I followed the advice of writing my points down so that they don't get lost if I get emotional, lol. I will do my best not to let him slither out of it, and I hope he has some proof that his colleagues know I'm his wife. Update 1. On Saturday morning I woke up earlier than my husband. He was very hungover, so he was like sleeping a rock. But you guys will be proud of me, because I followed some advice and decided to look through his phone properly while he was sleeping. I have been on his phone so often just pissing around on it that I had never thought to check anything very deeply. I know his passcode by heart. I checked all the expected things like Instagram DMs, Facebook Messenger, his iMessages, etc., and I didn't find anything that set off alarm bells to me. But I know from some comments that people who are cheating are good at covering their tracks and hiding messages, so I kept looking around. I saw he had a folder called Work, and so I looked in there, and he had a couple of Microsoft apps, Outlook, Authenticator, OneNote, etc., but he also had MS Teams. So I opened that up and had a look around. It did feel like I might have been breaking laws looking at his work messages, but I obviously had too. Anyway, I was already upset to see that he had a bunch of one-on-one chats with several female coworkers. Which, at first glance, is obviously not an issue, because everyone works with people of the opposite gender and are required to communicate with them. But a couple of them were vaguely flirty, nothing I would call egregious, but there would be the occasional message between them with some playful innuendo or a wink emoji. These upset me, obviously, and they did send me into a bit of a spiral, but I didn't find anything that suggested he was having an out-and-out affair with any of them. Still, I followed someone's suggestion of screenshotting the messages and I airdropped them to myself. I still wanted some evidence of the lie, though, some proof of Josh telling someone that I was his sister directly. A commenter suggested that I go through his messages and search for keyword sister. I wanted to reply to your comment and say thank you for the idea, but the post was locked so I couldn't, but thank you. So I searched for sis on his MS Teams, hoping to find results for both sister and sis. A bunch of messages from all hands group chats or one-on-one chats came up from other people, all unrelated and about their own sisters or whatever. But my heart dropped out my ass, lol, when I saw there was a direct message from Jake, the guy from the bar, to Josh from a Monday a few months ago. Jake's messages said, ran into your sis at the bar on Friday, she's single, right? And my husband had the fucking gall to reply, nah, she's married. I literally almost burst into flames on the spot when I saw that. I can't even describe how much I was shaking after reading those messages. Firstly, that I could have confronted Josh about this months ago. I was, and still am, so furious with myself for that. Josh would have been fucking praying I didn't remember meeting Jake or that I wouldn't mention it, and he would have been counting his lucky stars that I never did. He probably thought he was hot shit for getting away with that and I nearly burnt a hole through the floor thinking about it, lol. But secondly, I was just in shock that he had the balls to tell this guy that I'm the one who is married, because he doesn't want anyone having it on with me, but he is allowed to coyly flirt with every fucking woman in the office? Anyway, I kept going back through the search results on his MS Teams, and eventually I got as far back as 2-ish years ago, and I did in fact find a message from Josh himself to a group chat. It said me and sis in Nusa Dua. I clicked on that and saw that he had sent it alongside a bunch of photos of him and I from our holiday to Bali. We went to Bali for our second anniversary. I thought he probably chose those photos because he's shirtless and had been working out, so he looked hot in all of them. I was in tears seeing all of this, obviously. I took screenshots of those too and airdropped all of the screenshots to myself. Needless to say I was devastated, and still am, to see all of that. I am still struggling to even process it at all. But that all happened on Saturday morning, and I immediately took myself to my friend's house. I'll call her Sophie. I went to her place to cry it out and show her what I found, and she was extremely supportive and probably more furious than me, lol. At around 1:30 p.m. I got a phone call from Josh, and I hung it up immediately. He sent me a few messages along the lines of, "Where are you, baby? I'm ordering food, want some? Sad to not wake up next to you this morning." Guys, I have to reiterate how much I love this man, and how fucking heart-wrenching it was to see him still acting like nothing had gone wrong. It took so much willpower to not just pretend none of it had ever happened and go home to him. I know a lot of you will yell at me or accuse me of being terrified of confronting him about this, which is not true. Please have some empathy. It takes me time to process my emotions, and I wouldn't have even been able to form a sentence if I tried to confront him immediately after seeing those messages. I needed some time away with Sophie to recollect myself, and so I stayed the night at her place. She ordered us Chinese and she helped me plan how I would confront him. I got a bunch more texts and calls from him as the evening progressed, and I eventually put my phone on Do Not Disturb. Sunday morning I woke up feeling more angry than sad, so I opened my phone and finally replied to his messages. "Coming home now, need to talk." I kept it cryptic to make him squirm, to be honest. Because I was /am fraught with emotions, I can't remember the entire conversation word for word, but I'll try to replay it as best I can. Long story short, I got home and he tried to hug me, but I refused him and we just stood in the kitchen. I did confront him like someone suggested. I just said, "Why have you been telling your coworkers I'm your sister?" I wish it would have been like a movie scene where the color drained from his face, or he immediately looked like a deer in headlights, but he didn't. It was like he had been girding himself for this confrontation for a while, because he just frowned at me and looked flabbergasted. He just said, "Huh?" This made me so angry. "How are you going to pretend to be stupid after 3 years of lying?" I basically said, "Don't play fucking dumb. 2 of your coworkers have greeted me as your sister, and I have proof of you telling them. And I know you're pretending to be single." Essentially, I asked him what he had to say for himself. He still played stupid. He became moderately defensive and just kept saying, "I don't know what you're talking about," or, "Why would I lie about you?" I cannot describe how furious I was at this point, but I was in tears. I always cry when I'm angry, so he was trying to comfort me as if I was having some kind of irrational breakdown. I showed him the screenshot of his message saying me and sis, and I said something like, "You tell me." He said, "I don't know what I'm looking at, and I'm confused." I got so angry that I left again, and went back to Sophie's, because it felt like a dead-end road. I didn't think I was going to get him to admit to anything, and I was just getting so furious I couldn't continue. He was really upset, and in tears, which to me was evidence that he knew he was lying and that he was going to have to come up with some explanation. He tried to get me to stay, but I told him that until you have something to say for yourself, we've got nothing to talk about. At like 8:30ish, he called me again and I did pick up. He basically asked for us to talk and he said he has some things to say, so I went back to our apartment. He had written out a bunch of stuff on a piece of paper as if he had prepared a speech and sat me down on the couch. He asked me not to say anything while he was explaining himself. I'll write down the gist of what he said in bullet points. Anyway, I couldn't really think of anything to say at that point. He went to lock himself in the bathroom, and I just sat on the couch crying. I still don't know if I can trust what he said, and a lie that extreme is just baffling to me. If he can lie like that, for so long, what else could he be lying about? But his explanation and apologies seemed so sincere and genuine, and I guess to an extent what he said is believable. He has always been extroverted but very susceptible to peer pressure, especially from other blokes. If nothing else, to me, it's a sign of shocking immaturity. Anyway, I packed up a bag and went back to Sophie's, and I'm still at her place as I'm writing this. She said I can stay as long as I need to. I told Josh that I needed time away from him to think about everything and whether or not I believe him, or whether I can ever trust him again. He told me to take as long as I needed and that he will still be there if or when I get back, he said, even if it takes a year. Right now nothing feels real. I'm still dealing with the emotional whiplash from all of this and I can't keep food down or think about anything. I've taken the day off work and Josh told me he's going to take off the whole week. Sophie and my other friends have told me not to make a decision on anything until my head is clear. I spoke to my parents this morning and my mom says it's just a bump in the road, but she and my dad adore Josh so they're pretty biased, lol. Now on to second story. Told my wife that her friend overstayed her welcome, offered to send her back home, and now I'm dealing with silence. My, 45 male, wife's friend Zell, 32F, has been living with us for the past month after her marriage imploded about a month ago. Zell came to our country about 3 years ago on a work visa. She was working for a company and met my wife Molly, F43, at a work event. Molly and Zell became quick friends as Molly used to do social work, and she found Zell's story to be very moving and interesting. Zell started dating this guy I'll call Ed, M35, who had recently launched a company in her field. She left her original job and started working for Ed, and not long after that, they got married. Zell's job became pretty cushy. So instead of working, she went back to college to pursue a career in social work, and since Molly had experience in this, she became a sort of mentor for Zell. With Ed funding Zell's education and living expenses, it seemed like everything was set for her. Fast forward to mid-August, and Ed found out Zell had been cheating on him for several weeks with one of her classmates. Ed immediately cut funding for Zell's education and kicked her out of his house. The prenup Ed had her sign left her with absolutely nothing, effectively making her penniless and homeless. On top of that, Ed has spread the story across their community, and as such, Zell's reputation is in tatters, and her family back in their home country wants nothing to do with her, supposedly. The divorce hasn't been finalized at the time of this writing. With the resources he has, I imagine Ed could speed up the process, but for whatever reason, it's dragging on. With seemingly no one to turn to, Zell came to us, and Molly welcomed her one day while I was at work. Since then, she has been living in our basement. Molly spends a lot of time now just talking to Zell and trying to help her get her life back on track. So much so that it is starting to affect our personal lives, and I feel like childcare has been made exclusively my responsibility for most of the week. Not only that, but since our gym equipment is in the basement, I had to stop working out, which has adversely affected my own mental health. I've been very annoyed about the entire situation but have largely borne it in silence until last night. Right before bed, Molly started going on about how the divorce could take months and that we need to find Zell a lawyer. At this stage, I told her that Zell had overstayed her welcome and needed to leave. It got pretty heated, and my wife said I was being shockingly unempathetic. I told her she was ignoring her responsibilities to our children, which deeply offended her. In the end, I told her that as a compromise, we could buy Zell a plane ticket back to her home country so she could be with her family. Molly was so upset at this for whatever reason and just responded with good night. We haven't spoken since then, partially because I decided to go work in my office today since I needed a break from Molly's nonsense. I honestly don't know what to do at this stage. I just want that woman out of my home. Update 1. Also, for those wondering, the classmate won't have her either. According to my wife, he told Zell that his personal life would be destroyed if he tried pursuing anything with her, so he ended things abruptly. To my understanding, he has a wife who doesn't even know he cheated. To sum things up, I did reach out to Molly on Sunday, and we managed to patch things up. Since we hadn't spoken for more than a day at that point, I decided not to push the Zell issue any further right then. Fast forward to early Monday morning, and we get a call from Molly's sister. Apparently, their father had a serious fall in the bathroom during the night, and their whole family is flying out to check in on him. Molly booked her flight soon after the news and left yesterday, 2/24th. She hasn't booked her return yet, but I'm guessing she'll be gone 10 to 15 days, depending on the severity of her father's injuries. In the meantime, I've been totally swamped with work and taking care of the kids, but Zell has offered to help out where she can. This morning, she made breakfast for all of us and even packed lunches for me and the kids, so I don't really have any complaints at the moment. Last night, she did some laundry and straightened up the living room and playroom as well. So far, I'm pleasantly impressed and figure I'll keep my mouth shut for now, depending on how things go from here. Edit. After reading a few comments, I'd like to assure everyone that it is extremely unlikely that Zell will try anything suggestive. To be totally honest, I always got the sense that she felt like I didn't like her much. In the time she's been here, we've probably only spoken 10 to 12 times, and about half of those were just in the past 24 hours given the current circumstances. If she wants to make herself useful, I won't stop her. That being said, several of my women coworkers have expressed their disbelief and disappointment in how Molly departed so suddenly, and one even suggested that I do not eat food prepared by Zell. Moreover, 2 of the older ladies have even offered to make food for myself and the children, but I declined. The way I see it, if Zell is useful when I actually need the help, I won't complain despite the protests of some of my coworkers. Molly and I have been paying for all her living expenses. This is the least she can do. Update 2. It's been a week since Molly departed, so I thought it would be a good time to provide a brief update on our situation. Molly's father broke his foot when he fell in the bathroom. Fortunately, the injury isn't too severe, and the doctors expect him to recover within about 8 weeks. The greater concern at the time was the cut on his lip, which caused pretty significant bleeding and understandably led to all the panic, especially for Molly's mother, who found him on the floor. I spoke with him a few times over the phone, and he seems to be in good spirits. For a man turning 88 this November, he's spry for his age and is pretty active, so I'm hopeful for his full recovery. Molly and I have also had several conversations. While she initially intended to stay longer to help her parents adjust, her mother has been adamant that she return home. In fact, her mother even expressed some frustration over how abruptly Molly left and suggested that I should have been the one to go instead. It's something Molly wants to talk about in person. Molly's return flight is scheduled for October 10th. At home, things have really been shaken up by Molly's absence. To be honest, this entire ordeal has made me more appreciative of all she does. On the plus side, I've been getting to spend much of my time with my 2 little girls, and this past weekend, I even learned how to braid their hair, though I admit I'm still not very good. Zell has continued to be very helpful around the house. She's an extraordinary cook, and every day we are treated to something new for supper. The ingredients she needs are expensive, but given the quality of the food and how much the girls and I enjoy it, I'm not complaining. Zell asked to use the gym equipment we have in the basement, and I agreed. This led to a conversation about how I used to work out down there, and she offered to occupy one of the other rooms during my exercise time. However, I've been mainly coordinating my workouts with when she's doing something else so as not to disturb her. Zell has also asked me to look over a few resumes she's been sending out to different job openings, and I've gone over them and given her suggestions on how to improve them. I don't anticipate the coming days will bring anything too exciting, but I'll be sure to share another update if anything noteworthy arises. Update 3. I regret to disappoint those eagerly awaiting scandal, but Zell and I behaved entirely appropriately during Molly's absence. Yes, I've managed to rise above the incredibly low bar of not betraying my marriage in the few days Molly was away. I feel like I deserve a medal for such extraordinary restraint. Now, on to the boring update. The remaining days before Molly's return continued as per the new normal. Zell continued being helpful and attended 2 different job interviews, and got 1 acceptance. Molly returned in the early hours of October 10th, and things have been going well for the past few days. I didn't bring up the fact that Zell is still living with us for 2 reasons. Molly is still pretty concerned about her father, and Zell had been very helpful during her absence. So for those reasons, I was waiting for Molly to bring it up, and I didn't have to wait too long. Last night, Molly brought it up while we were getting ready for bed. She mentioned how she worries about Zell since, without a job or a degree, her chances of being deported eventually are higher. She then went on about how Zell couldn't return to her home country since she was so accustomed to life here. This is the usual sob story Molly's been telling for the past 2-ish months. I mentioned helping out Zell with her resumes, and Molly was happy with that. She then told me something I wasn't aware of. For the past 2 weeks, Zell and Ed have been texting each other, News to me, though in hindsight, it explains a lot, especially given Ed's lack of progress in finalizing the divorce. On top of that, Ed has continued footing her phone bill all this time. The man's patience is on another level. Should he and Zell reconcile, I floated the idea of asking him to financially compensate us. Molly shot down the idea, but I can sense she wasn't entirely closed off to it. Aside from that, not too much has been happening. Zell's job should start in about 2 weeks. Once she starts getting paid, she'll move out. Molly tells me that Zell has already started looking into apartments.